Well, everybody, I want to welcome you back to the show and a very special program today. We're here live in the Las Vegas Convention Center. I'm joined with a good friend of mine, Chris Pereira, who is an outstanding entrepreneur. He's a businessman. He's lived in China for over 15 years, fluent in Mandarin Chinese. And Chris, you have an amazing business because you're primarily focused on connecting China with North America.
That's right. Yeah, right? Cyrus, it's great to see you again, and here on site in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, my company, North American Ecosystem Institute, we specifically help Chinese companies with their overseas branding, their promotion, helping them be more local, and in America's case, to be more American.
Right.
Helping them access the mainstream market.
Absolutely. Well, for the longtime viewers of the channel, you've known Chris. We've done several interviews together. Mm-hmm. It's amazing that we're both here on site because I think you and I have a very similar vision, is that we're always trying to be this cultural bridge. Both of us focus a lot on the business side.
That's right.
We're connecting businesses. And I wanted to start off because 2023 is going to be a big year, I think, for China specifically, right? We're seeing China's government has now shifted away from zero COVID very rapidly, very big surprise to the West. But I want to get your expectations as a businessman looking at China. What are your expectations this year for China in 2023?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting and very big year for Chinese companies.
Yeah.
As like you mentioned, China's gone full tilt towards opening up again, which is great news for business and I think for the world in many ways. So I'm glad to see that China's moving forward with the COVID, taking things step by step, but opening up. What I think we're going to see in 2023 and what we've seen in the last year, we've seen massive demand for overseas market expansion.
Yeah.
And different from previous expansions, I think if you look 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, China was exporting things, products, and didn't care too much about the brand, didn't care too much about overseas reputation. Hey, we're going to sell the nicest stuff for the best price.
Right.
And we don't really care what you think about us.
That
was sort of the approach back in the day. But what we're seeing now is Chinese products and brands are moving from lower end to mid end and high end markets.
That's right.
And when you're in the high end market, you're competing on brand and style, fashion. Hey, does this brand match my personal style in my life?
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
think of an Apple iPhone, why do people buy that? It's not necessarily that the camera is better than any other phone necessarily. It's, hey, this phone's style, this brand is me.
Yeah.
So in order to get that kind of effect in North America for a Chinese brand, you need to care more about your branding, your local connections. You need to be more local.
Yeah.
And basically, in a nutshell, that's what we help Chinese companies do. And not to hide the fact that they're from China. I'm from Canada.
Yeah.
When I'm in the United States, I don't talk about Canada because Americans don't care about Canada.
That's right. Yeah. It very much is. When you come to this market, you're going to have to adapt. And I think that's a good insight because what Chris does is he's helping companies, specifically Chinese companies, enter into this market. I'm very optimistic for China in 2023. And I think what we've seen from the Chinese government is a shift now to really prioritize that economy, and really try to create more jobs.
That's right.
The economy is going to be very important for China moving forward. Chris, I want to talk a little bit about more this business side because, I deal a lot with geopolitics. And I think what we see here in the United States is sometimes we see a lot of politicians will say things that are very anti-China. Yep. They want to appear to be very hardline stance against China. I think a good example here would be the TikTok ban, right? Actually, we're looking at, we should ban TikTok because it's a national security threat. Yeah. But at the same standpoint, we actually have American CEOs on the board of ByteDance, right? There's a lot of, 60% of ByteDance is actually owned by institutional funds, many of those being, a large American hedge fund. So we kind of see a difference here where politicians say one thing, but businessmen are doing a different thing. And I think there's a lot of optimism, for U.S. and China business side. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I'm very optimistic about the relationship on the business side between China and the U.S. for a few reasons. If you look at history, say the 70s and 80s, Japan faced similar pushback when they expanded and opened up overseas. There was a lot of pushback. There were sanctions on the Japanese invasion in tech and cars, etc. And what that did was push Japanese companies to really localize from whether it's from a branding communication perspective or values perspective. 70s, 80s, well, when people think of Sony now, what do they think of? They don't think of the Second World War and what Japan did in those years. They think of, hey, Sony's a cool company that meets my expectations as for a brand, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a transition in that towards when you see some of the Chinese brands that are doing exceptional work overseas. Here in CES too, we have companies like TCL here everywhere. It's on the back of this lanyard.
There you go.
Everywhere. So to answer your question there, I think I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah.
And I think it's not going to be an easy year for Chinese companies. And maybe just to touch on your point about the TikTok ban,
right,
and the pushback on the political side, I think to go back to first principles for a second, what makes America great?
Right.
So I've spent a lot of time in the United States.
Yeah.
The U.S. has a free market.
Right.
Where people are treated equally.
Right.
As long as you're following the rules, you're in the confines of the law.
Absolutely.
We don't care if you're from Korea,
right,
from Canada, from China.
Absolutely.
If you're here on this floor in CES and you don't break the law,
absolutely,
you're treated the same.
Absolutely.
So I think I would encourage American politicians to return to that base that, hey, okay, if you break the law, we're going to crack down.
Absolutely.
If you don't, we don't view the color of your skin or what passport you hold. I think you can protect the interests of America, that's very important.
Yeah.
Through legal means.
Yeah.
But I think we should have high standards for every company,
yes,
not just Chinese companies.
I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of, for example, a lot of these Chinese companies are listing in the stock market. People are saying, wow, they're not following the correct accounting practices, things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, for every company, regardless of where you're from, if you're listing in the New York Stock Exchange, right, there should be rules and regulations. Exactly. Every company, if you're Chinese.
And when someone makes a mistake, we don't. So if you're from Ireland and you break the law, we don't suddenly say, hey, we need to crack down on Ireland.
Exactly.
We need to crack down on this individual, right?
Absolutely.
So I think
Absolutely.
that's really important.
Well, I think you've hit on a good point, and you bring in a good perspective because you're a Canadian here in America. You founded a company in New York City. You're doing business here because this is an amazing market. It's one of the reasons why I left after 15 years of living abroad. That's why I've come back to the United States, because I feel it's important for me to be this cultural bridge here on the ground in the United States as an American citizen. But I agree with you. We've had a little bit too much targeting towards China. China, very similar. You brought up a good point as far as Japan in the 70s and 80s, right? We saw people smashing the Japanese cars. There's a Japanese invasion. There were books being written that Japan's taking over the world. Yeah. But all of a sudden, things kind of simmered down, and it was because of that restructuring and that branding that they did. And now Japan is seen very favorably in the West. I mean, like you said, we look at Sony here in America. I mean, we look at that as a very positive company. I think you're going to see that, there's a transition that's going to happen with Chinese companies. Look at like Hisense, for example. I mean, they've been a great World Cup sponsor, but they're producing some amazing technology. TCL, all of these Chinese companies are.
To play devil's advocate or to raise the challenge to this, which I think is important. So what about the spies? What about cybersecurity? What about national interest? Right. And I wanted to address that directly. Actually, I think it's a really interesting topic it's actually good for America to have this perspective that I'd like to share.
Okay,
to you.
Please.
If we're worried about spies,
right,
in Chinese companies, especially tech. A smart vacuum driving through our house, they're taking pictures of our home, right? That's the risk.
Right.
So if you're a smart spy from China, where are you going to go? Are you going to go to Huawei and to TCL?
Right.
If I was a smart spy, no, I wouldn't do that.
Right.
I'd go to the American companies, which are under less scrutiny.
Right.
because of current regulatory framework. So that's why I always say, hey, we should go back to first principles and raise the bar for all companies.
Right.
And I'm not saying we should crack down on Chinese people in those companies. I think we should have strict rules for every organization, and that can protect America.
Yeah.
But I think this irrational fear that people have about China, I think if our goal is to protect the U.S., I think we should be more rational about it and say, hey, strong standards that are applied equally is what made America strong, and what will keep America strong.
Yeah, absolutely. But the big thing here is, we're here at CES. Again, this is the world's largest electronics show. We've met so many Chinese people here, and there's
there's over 150 exhibitors from China here.
Yeah, 150 exhibitors coming from China. And Chris, you've worked with over, this is an amazing fact I wanted to get out on this video, because in 2022, we've seen probably the highest level of tension between the United States and China. But on the flip side, we've also seen the highest amount of trade between these two countries, right? 36 out of the top 100 foreign companies in China are actually American. And your company alone, you've worked with over 40 companies last year,
That's right.
Helping Chinese companies come into this market. Yeah. And so I think, again, what I want people, and this is the big takeaway that I want you to take away from this message, is that sometimes politicians and the geopolitics are going to be high, but this is what's important. When you come to trade shows and you're actually seeing, there's so many Chinese people here. There's so much optimism here. I think there's a lot of people that are happy that China's opening up. And I think both of us are going to be returning back to China in 2023 because of that business opportunity, right? So, we're looking forward to that. Chris, thank you so much for joining the show again, man.
Good to see you.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it. Everybody, make sure that you like this video, give us a subscribe, and comment down below what your favorite point is. We're going to continue sharing more insights from CES. My name's Cyrus. We'll see you in the next video.